You may be seated. Okay, so we're going to continue our look into 2 Samuel today. We'll be looking at 2 Samuel 4, verses 1 through 12. Of course, that's the end of the chapter. But just to get us caught up on where we are, as far as how do we get to this chapter for those who haven't heard it, we are talking about first in 1 Samuel and in of course, Joshua and also in 1st and 2nd Samuel, we're talking about the inception of the Israelite state. How did Israel get into the land in the Exodus? They come out of Egypt. They come into the land as conquerors in Joshua. And then they are being led, as we talked about in Numbers, as a theocracy. That is, they are being directly guided by God. By a pillar of fire or a pillar of smoke in the day and a pillar of fire at night. They are being ruled directly by God. And then they cry out, they say, we want a king like the other nations. We want to be a great nation like the other nations. And so God turns them over to their own devices as He is accustomed to doing. You see, I heard it put week before last in a sermon I heard it, that God was the perfect gentleman. He's not going to force Himself upon a people who are resistant. So just as a starting exhortation today, remember that the more that you turn away from God, the more He will turn you over to your own devices. If you have something that you are putting on a shelf above Him, He will deliver you over to it, knowing very well that this thing is not worthy of Him, nor of your affections, but He will allow you to do so because of the will He has given you. Now, we're going to continue tonight our study into the book of Romans. We've been talking to some extent about the will and how it plays into our belief and practice of our faith. So you may want to join us tonight at 6 when we look at the book of Romans. But this, they end up, as we said, they pick a king according to earthly measures, the tallest and the most good-looking. And a lot of times we're guilty of that as well. I heard a pastor talk about when he was a kid passing by a shop window and he saw a golden rocking horse painted with purple spots when he was a young fella. And he said that was like the Xbox of his day. And he said, that is what I want for Christmas and nothing else will satisfy me. And he even prayed, Lord, give me the rocking horse that I want. And that Christmas morning came. And the young man saw the rocking horse sitting beneath the Christmas tree, and he was elated until he sat on it and figured out that though it was beautiful from the outside, it was rotted on the inside and it crumbled beneath his weight. A lot of the things that we see in the world, they turn to ash in our mouth. And when we seek after worldliness, it never seems to satisfy. Anyways, so they pick Saul, but Saul becomes jealous of David. Eventually, the anointing of God passes on to David, and David becomes the next king of Israel. But it's not quite so simple as that, because Saul's major general, Abner, who we talked about last week and the week before, he wants to keep the power within his own family, and so he sets his own kin, and that being, of course, Saul's natural-born son, Ishbosheth, up as the king of Israel, knowing full well that God has already anointed David as king. Now, as we've talked about, there's this dispute that arises over the death of one of Joab's brothers, David's general, Joab. And Joab ends up setting a trap for Abner and murdering him in the gate of Hebron. Now, when we come to this passage, what's just happened is that Abner has been killed and buried at Hebron, and Ishbosheth, now with his kingship being secured by this man who was powerful and great in his own right, but is now passed, Ishbosheth is fearful for his own life. And it says there in verse 1 of chapter 4, now when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all Israel was disturbed. Now, I want to take all Israel was disturbed, and let's point back in verse 37 of the previous chapter where it says, all Israel understood. Okay? So here is David. David did not set up Abner, and he went to do great lengths so that people would know that the plan of David was a plan of unification and of peace. Perhaps this is one of many reasons why David is described as a man after God's own heart. And so the people understood that David was not complicit to the murder of Abner. They understood it, the people of Israel did, but nevertheless they were disturbed. Can you imagine what it must have been like, or what it must be like even today, to grow up in a civilization where there is a civil war, where your own people, you can't trust them? Of course, we all look back naturally to our own American Civil War, the war that was described as brother against brother, and it oftentimes split even households. And so we understand from that perspective, though we might not have experienced it, how they might in one breath understand in verse 37 that David was not complicit in this act, but also be fearful about their future. We are often upset in our own lives, and we have cause to be fearful about our future. So in that regard, we can at least relate. Now it says Saul's son had two men who were commanders of his bands. Now, we need to question Saul's son Ishbosheth. As I said before, he's known elsewhere in the Bible as Ishbaal, which suggests that, at least from the biblical perspective of the writer of Chronicles, Ishbosheth was not really that vital towards the God Yahweh. He was one who might be inclined to appease the people, however that may be, to make offerings to foreign gods. Now, he takes these two guys who are not really trustworthy guys, and I'll tell you why he shouldn't have trusted them in just a second. He takes these two guys and he makes them leaders of his people, of various bands of armed men. Now, it says that the name of one was Baana and the other was Rechab, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, of the sons of Benjamin. For Beeroth is also considered part of Benjamin. Now, where else do we get this Beeroth? Now, Beeroth, if you read back into the Pentateuch, you'll see that Beeroth was the place where the Gibeonites tricked Joshua, not in the Torah. In Joshua chapter 9, the Gibeonites tricked Joshua. They came in, if you read the story, it says that God had commanded them to make peace with no people because his judgment was upon all the people of the land. You remember when he wasn't allowing them to come into the land, he was telling them that this is because the sins of the Canaanites had not been filled. The fullness of their sin had not been realized. But by the time Joshua is coming in, God's judgment is on all the people of the land, and he says, make no treaties with these people because of their sin. But what happens is they're deceived by these Gibeonites. These Gibeonites, they put on old ratty clothing, and they bring old bread, stale bread, and they come to the Israelites on tired, dirty horses or tired, dirty mounts. Probably not horses. They come to them on tired, dirty mounts, and then they tell the people, they say, hey, we're from a faraway country. You don't have to worry about us. But listen, we've heard about your people and about your God, how you are fearsome in battle. And we would like to go ahead and make peace with you so that if ever you do come to us, that we would have this peace between us. Now, instead of going and inquiring of the Lord of who these people were, the Israelites, they go ahead and make peace with the Gibeonites, not knowing who they are. And as it turns out, even though their mounts were tired and their bread was stale, and they had all of these evidences to say that they had come on this long and arduous journey, as a matter of fact, they were just from a little ways over, and they were directly in the promised land. But by then, the peace had already been struck, and so they had to abide by the peace and covenant they'd made before the Lord. So these Gibeonites were always known as underhanded people and tricksters. So had Ishbosheth or Ishbaal known the story, which he likely did, why in the world would he set these men, these untrustworthy men, over his people? And it's because he did not have faith in the promises and deliverance of God. If he had, he would have recognized David's anointing. It was common knowledge. Now, it says that these two men, they were the sons of Beeroth, because Beeroth found itself in the tribal allotment of Benjamin. And the Beerothites fled to Gideon, so they're going northwest up into the coastal region. They go northwest, and that's where they live as aliens to this day, it says. Now, Jonathan, we all remember Jonathan. Jonathan was the son who was friends with David, the son of Saul, who was friends with David. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son crippled in his feet. And he was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. So, we're not even going to deal with Mephibosheth in this particular instance, other than to say why it's introduced here. It is curious that they should introduce this character here, and I'll come back to that. Mephibosheth, interestingly enough, was also called Merib-Baal in Chronicles, and so there's still this connection between the house of Saul and the worship of Baals. So we do have this. But it introduces this son of Jonathan. Now, Jonathan is faithful. Jonathan is a friend of David. But he has this son, and when it's found out that Jonathan and Saul die in battle, the nursemaid, recognizing that she holds a potential heir to the throne of Israel, she tries to flee with Mephibosheth. And when she does, she accidentally falls or drops him. And because of the injury that he sustains, he becomes handicapped. He will be handicapped. Again, we'll discuss the implications of this as he comes into David's court later. Now, it says, so the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab, and Baanah departed and came to the house of Ishbosheth in the heat of the day while he was taking his midday rest. You know what one of the greatest things that I learned ever was? I'm not sure why this is not a practice here, but I think it should be. When I did a study abroad in Italy, and I found out that they have national nap time at 2 o'clock. That's a sweet arrangement, guys. I really think. National nap time at 2 o'clock. And you would be maybe surprised to hear that this practice goes all the way back to ancient times and even in Israel today. When we go to excavate in the summers, we go and we'll get up early in the morning. We're up at 4:30 on site and tents up and ready to work at 5:30. Sometimes we're actually on the site to be able to see the sunrise. And we do that because it gets so hot during the day and because there's so little relief from shade that if we work during the hottest parts of the day from about 1 o'clock to about 4:30, that we would literally, it would be painful. So we want to go ahead and get our work in the cool of the morning. Now that's what they did, and so that's why Ishbosheth is inside the tent during the midday. And these men knew this. So they came, it says, to the middle of the house as if to get wheat. Now, here's the trick. In ancient households, the central area that you come into in the beginning of the entryway of the house was what was known as storage. Okay, so you'd have all these store jars. Animals might also be stored there. And this central entryway into the ancient household was a storage area. So they're coming into the middle of the house, and everybody knows them, right? They're probably going in, smiling, everything else, just going to get a little lunch for midday. And they go in to the house, and they're received into the house. And it says that when they got into the middle of the house, they struck him in his belly. And Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. Now, when they came into the house, as he was lying on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him and killed him and beheaded him. This, of course, being Ishbosheth. Now, there's some kind of something funny going on in the text here between 6 and 7, because it seems as though we have two different instances of them making attempts on Ishbosheth's life, or there could be linguistic connections back to the first attempt, the person being struck in the belly being perhaps Mephibosheth. But it's not completely clear from the text. Nevertheless, these do seem like a little bit different instances, because in one you have the person being struck in the middle of the house, and in the other you have the person being struck in the bedroom. Now these are not the same, right? Now it says, when they came into the house as he was lying on his bed in the bedroom, they struck him and killed him and beheaded him. Now, once they had taken the head of Ishbosheth, these men thought that they would escape and they would run to David, and David would go, "Oh man, you delivered my kingdom to me. You guys are like the best," right? But we're going to see that David is not at all happy about what these men have done. Now it says there that they ride all night. They come through the Arabah in verse 7. Now the Arabah is probably the most desolate place you could possibly be. If I was going to film a movie set on Mars, I would go to the Arabah. Okay, that's the region between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, so if you can think of the Dead Sea, the arid, salty, dry lands, there's nothing there. But of course, this would work for their purposes. They want to take the route that is the quickest to travel. And let me tell you what grows in the Arabah. Nothing. Okay, so there's no impediment. They get on their mounts and they ride through the Arabah as fast as they possibly can. Of course, at night. First of all, because they want the cover of night so that nobody sees them fleeing. And secondly, because if they went during the day, boy, they'd be baked by the time they got there. Now, so they flee all night long through the Arabah. And it says in verse 8 that they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, "Behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy." Now, was David the enemy of Saul? Saul might have been seen as the enemy of David, but was David ever the enemy of Saul? There was never an instance where David raised his hand against Saul. As a matter of fact, he said he would disdain to raise his hand against the anointed of the Lord. And on multiple occasions, he comes in and proves to Saul that though he could have taken his life, he didn't, because he's no threat to him. So these men, they come in and they tell him, "Saul, your enemy, his son Ishbosheth, that sought your life. Thus the Lord has given my lord the king vengeance this day on Saul and his descendants." Now, had Ishbosheth himself treated David unfairly? Well, no, he hadn't. As a matter of fact, in just the previous chapter, we'd read about how Ishbosheth had delivered to David the wife that was taken from him, his own sister. He said, "Yes, you married him. Go and be with the one that you married." And so neither Ishbosheth had been unfair to David, nor had been his enemy. Now David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress." Now, I know that this is just a platitude that he's building up to judgment, but there's also a statement of faith here. First of all, the declaration that the Lord lives. When Moses came to the people, he was to come to the people and he was to tell them, he was saying like, "Who shall I say sent me?" And God said what? He said, "I am." Tell them that I am sent you. The God who is, the only one, right? As we just discussed from our Torah reading. It says there that the Lord lives and that he has redeemed my life from all my distresses. Now, you think David wasn't going to have more troubles as king? We're going to find out that David had a lot of distresses. His distresses were ongoing. In this moment, he was probably distressed because the life of an innocent man had been taken yet again. And many people could presume that he was involved in the murder of Ishbosheth. But the Lord is our deliverer. Isn't it good that we serve a God who, despite our circumstances, is our deliverer? It doesn't matter what circumstances that we find ourselves in. God has redeemed us, and he is our deliverer. It says there, he says, behold, even though, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all my distresses, when one told me, saying, behold, Saul is dead, and he thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and I killed him in Ziklag, which was the reward that I gave him for his news. He says, how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own home, on his bed, shall I not require his blood from your hand and destroy you from the earth? What is he saying here? He's saying, man, like, here was Saul. Saul was fighting an ongoing battle, but Ishbosheth had made peace. Abner had come and already swore his fealty to David, and when he did, that transfer of power that happened then had already all but assured David the kingdom. And here Ishbosheth, a man who had caused no ill to David, had even done a good turn to David by returning his wife. And this man, his life was taken in his own bed, and this person says that he's done a good thing. And he says, because of this, man, how can you have any better fate? And then it says that David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and their feet and hung them up beside the pool in Hebron. It says, but they took the head of Ishbosheth and they buried it in the grave of Abner at Hebron. They put Ishbosheth's head into the family grave, is what it is, because these two are related. This is what it meant in the Bible when it said gathering to your elders. You would actually be in a mass burial with grandma and great-grandma and whoever else. Now, this judgment is an interesting thing that we see here, that he would cut off their hands and their feet, and hang them at the pool of Hebron. And there's actually a lot of correlation between this particular act and between pools and between judgments. Now, a pool, of course, is a place that you would go to get cleansed. And if you did not have a pool for cleansing, it would be like you're stuck in your sin, right? So in Nahum, who's writing in the 7th century, Nahum 2:8, it says that Nineveh is like a pool whose water has drained away. Basically saying they are beyond judgment. They're beyond cleansing. Now, when they strike off the hands and feet, this is a judgment of God, basically saying they are no longer free to move about or to act wickedly. We see a form of this in the judgment of Adonai-Bezek, the Canaanite king, in Judges 1:6 and 7, where they cut off his thumbs and his big toe. This is a symbol. And so you have to begin to see through the eyes of the ancient world that these things are connected as judgments. They are seeing these as judgments of God. Now, somebody was asking me recently, how do we look at the text? And so I want to suggest to you a quick hermeneutic. That is a plan for viewing the text. In any text that you come to, you should be looking for 4 distinct things. You should be seeking to know, how did the original author intend that this text be received? Then you need to go a step further and you need to go, well, let me consider the audience. How would this audience have received it? Then you have to bring it to its modern application and say, how does this apply to us? And finally, fourth, you have to say, where is Jesus in this passage? It behooves us to find Jesus in every passage that we come to. This is, after all, a book about Jesus. It's about God's promises and those promises being fulfilled in Jesus. Now, I want to tell you, first of all, I got to wrap up a little loose end that we left with Mephibosheth. Why do we get this story of Mephibosheth in this seemingly strange context where he's not mentioned anywhere else? Well, I think that the author is probably, in his original intent, trying to tell you that this would have shown the people, the readers of this text, that David was not trying to wipe out the lineage of Saul. Here's this man, and even though he's lame, which was a hardship for an ancient people, even though he's lame, David would go on to preserve him. David does not have wicked intent upon the house of Saul. Now, how do we apply this to our lives? Well, I think that at least in this instance, how do we apply it to our lives? And finding Jesus in this passage are one and the same. You see, when we take our cares before Jesus, we have to trust that Jesus is a righteous judge. David in this text is pictured in the form of Jesus, right? David is a type of Messiah. Jesus would eventually come and fulfill the role that David was a picture of. And we see this very clearly in the text because it says in the text that there would always be a king on the throne of David. Now, if this line is ceased at any point, which we know that if these promises are for national Israel, then this line certainly was ceased during the Babylonian exile, then the word is not true. Therefore, Jesus, eternal as he is the only rightful king ever, backwards or forwards or everywhere in between, of the throne of David. Furthermore, he is a righteous judge. Just as David delivered righteous judgments according to the law, so also Jesus delivers righteous judgments. Now, I know this has been a kind of convoluted way around coming back to Jesus, but this is what I want to tell you. Just as these men thought that they were the bearers of good news, sometimes we think that we are the workers of God's will. And it is true that regardless of whether our intentions are evil or whether they are good, God will work all things to His good and to those who love Him. But just because God can work our evils to His good doesn't mean that this is God's perfect plan. Nor does it mean that we will escape if we neglect so great a salvation. Jesus is a righteous judge. The messaging for Jesus, man, if he's got a advertising guy, that guy is not doing his job. Because when I see Jesus in our common context today, a lot of times it's my friend Jesus, my homeboy Jesus, I've even seen. Jesus is my homeboy. And while Jesus is my Redeemer and I love Him, to say that He is merely my friend is a drastic undersell of who Jesus is. Because this same Jesus is the one without whom nothing was created that was created. And He is our righteous interceder before the Father. And He is a good judge. And listen, today, He might be pricking one of your hearts. Jesus might be speaking to you today to tell you, as He does in Scripture, today is the day of salvation. I talked with a dear friend of mine yesterday and learned that his mother, who I cared about, had passed away since last we spoke. And it reminded me, because she was not very old, that our time on this earth is fleeting. Every day I turn on the news, I find somebody else who has some link to my childhood who's passed away. Hulk Hogan was a big hit. If you guys, that was a big blow for me. I recognize that the man and the character that I thought was the greatest alive when I was a child are two terribly different things. But nevertheless, we are faced with an eternity, and we have to decide when we have to decide what will we do with it. You can either receive the news or you cannot. You will not. But whether or not you receive what God has prepared for you makes no matter on whether God is a good judge. These people in this text, they could have came to David as faithful servants and not taken their master's life. Then they would have probably been seen as trustworthy. I know if somebody took a life to be able to earn my graces, I would have to think, well, what if they turn against me?